The three major fields of electronics are computers, communications, and control. The computer segment is the largest. The communications is the second largest. Communication is the process of exchanging information. The two main barriers to communication are language and distance. Most human communication is oral, but a great deal of it is also in written or printed form. Major electrical discoveries in the mid and late 19th century made possible the development of electronic communication over long distances. The telegraph and telephone were the first long-distance communication systems. Radio wave was discovered in 1887 and wireless telegraphy was demonstrated in 1895. The major elements of a communication system are a transmitter to send a message, a communication medium, a receiver to pick up the message, and noise. From the transmitter, the information or intelligence will be put to channel or medium wherein the messages is converted into signal-like waves or binary data which is compactable to transmit the messages through cables or satellites. During this process, the messages may be distracted or affected by noise. The messages and the noise is sent to the destination, the receiver. A transmitter is an electronic device which produces radio waves with the help of an antenna. A transmitter generates a radio frequency current applied to the antenna, which in turn radiates radio waves. A transmitter generates radio waves for communication, radar, and navigational purposes. A transmitter can either be a separate piece of electronic equipment or an integrated circuit within another electronic device. Most transmitters are used for radio communication of information over a certain distance. The information that is provided to the transmitter is in the form of an electronic signal. A communication channel refers either to a physical transmission medium such as a wire or to a logical connection over a multiplex medium such as a radio channel. A channel is used to convey an information signal. For example, a digital bit stream from one or several senders to one or several receivers. A channel has a certain capacity for transmitting information, often measured by its bandwidth in hertz or its data rate in bits per second. The three primary communications media are wires, free space, and the fiber optic cable. Receiver is a device or apparatus that receives electrical signals, waves or the like, and renders them perceptible to the senses. As the part of a telephone held to the ear, a radio receiving set, or a television receiving set. A transceiver is a device comprising both a transmitter and a receiver which are combined and share common circuitry or a single housing. When no circuitry is common between transmit and receive functions, the device is a transmitter-receiver. Attenuation is a reduction of signal strength during transmission, such as when sending data collected through automated monitoring. Attenuation is represented in decibels, which is 10 times the logarithm of the signal power at a particular input divided by the signal power at an output of a specified medium. Noise is an interference that disturbs the legible transmission of a signal. Noise is produced by the atmosphere, heavenly bodies, manufactured electrical equipment, and thermal agitation in electronic components. Electronic communications may be either one-way or two-way. One-way transmission is called simplex or broadcasting. Two-way communication is called duplex. In half-duplex communications, only one of the two parties can transmit at a time. In full duplex, both parties may transmit and receive simultaneously. Simplex is a communication channel that sends information in one direction only. Simplex is a communications channel that operates in one direction at a time. In a full duplex system, both parties can communicate with each other simultaneously. An example of a full duplex system is a telephone. The parties at both ends of a call can speak and be heard by the other party simultaneously. In a half-duplex system, there are still two clearly defined paths or channel, and each party can communicate with each other but not simultaneously. The communication is one direction at a time. An analog signal has a theoretically infinite resolution. In practice, an analog signal is subject to electronic noise and distortion introduced by communication channels and signal processing operations, which can progressively degrade the signal-to-noise ratio. Examples of analog signals are tone, voice, and video signal. Tone wave has a sine wave form. Voice is a sine wave but is not monotonous. Video signal is a combination of waveforms. A digital signal is a signal that represents a sequence of discrete values. A logic signal is a digital signal with only two possible values and describe an arbitrary bit stream. Other types of digital signals can represent three-valued logic or higher-valued logics. A digital signal is a physical quantity that is alternating between a discrete set of waveforms. Alternatively, a digital signal may be considered to be the sequence of codes represented by such a physical quantity. Examples of digital signals are telegraph, continuous wave code, and serial binary code. Digital to analog conversion is a process in which signals having a few or usually two defined levels of states or digital are converted into signals having a theoretically infinite number of states, which is the analog. A common example is the processing by a modem of a computer data into audio frequency tones that can be transmitted over a twisted pair of telephone line. The circuit that performs this function is a digital to analog converter.
In electronic and telecommunications, modulation is a process of varying one or more properties of a waveform called carrier signal with a modulating signal that typically contains information to be transmitted. Modulation is the process of having an information signal modifies a carrier signal in some way. Multiplexing, sometimes called mixing, is a method by which multiple analog or digital signals are combined into one signal over a shared medium. Baseband transmission is a type of transmission that is using current to send signal over the wire as a digital wave. It can transmit only one signal at a time due to requirement of the exclusive use of wire. Carrier. It is referred as the center frequency in FM, modulated by an information-bearing signal of another frequency. Radio frequency. Any of the electronic wave frequency that lie in the range extending from around 3 kHz to 3 GHz, which include those frequencies used for communication or radar signals. Broadband transmission. It is analog signal that is modulated. It is using different frequency, which increases the amount of data. AM. It is a modulation that most commonly for transmitting information via radio carrier wave. FM. It is encoding of an information in a carrier wave by varying the instantaneous frequency of the wave. Phase modulation is a modulation pattern that encodes information variation in instantaneous process or phase of the carrier wave. Modulation of the transmitter. From the voice in the microphone goes to the amplifier that has a baseband signal. It undergoes to modulate the carrier. It has a high-frequency carrier oscillator and amplify goes to the antenna. Types of modulation. Amplitude and frequency modulation shows a sinusoidal modulating signal in a carrier. Broadband transmission. Frequency shift keying is a frequency modulation scheme in which digital information is transmitted through discrete frequency changes of a carrier signal. Modems. This is a device that performs modulation. It modulates one or more carrier wave signals to encode digital information for transmission. Demodulator. It is the inverse of the modulation. It is the extracting the original information, varying signal from a modulated carrier wave. Three basic types of multiplexing. Frequency division. It is the technique by which total bandwidth available in a communication medium is divided into a series of non-overlapping frequency. Time division. It is the method of transmitting and receiving independent signals over a common signal path. Code division. It is the channel access method used by various radio communication technologies. Multiplexing at the transmitter. This graph represents the flow of the signals that can be multiple and amplified to the carrier to pass through the modulator and to the antenna. Electromagnetic spectrum. This is the collective term for all possible frequency of electromagnetic radiation. It is the range of all types of EM radiation, and this radiation energy that travels and spreads out as it goes to the visible light. Frequency. It is the number of occurrence of the repeating event per unit time. It is also referred to as a temporal frequency, which emphasizes the contrast to spatial frequency and angular frequency. Wavelength. In physics, the wavelength of the sinusoidal wave is the spatial period of the wave. It is the distance over which the wave shapes repeat and inverse of the spatial frequency. One cycle. It is the vibration for sine wave, and it is the complete event starting with a rise from zero energy to a maximum amplitude, the rise to a maximum in the opposite direction, and then it returns to zero. One wavelength. It is the distance sound travels during one period, regardless of the frequency. Wavelength. It is equal to the speed of light over frequency, where speed of light equals to the 3 times 10 raised to 8 meter per second. The example problem discussed on how to solve the wavelength. If the frequency is 4 MHz, wavelength equals 3 times 10 raised to 8 over 4 MHz is equal to 75 meters. Extremely low frequency are generated by lightning and natural disturbances in Earth's magnetic field. It has a frequency from 3 to 30 Hz. Very low frequency. It is a designation for radio frequency range of 3 kHz to 30 kHz. The wavelengths from 10 to 100 kilometers. Low frequency. It is the designation for radio frequency in the range of 30 kHz to 300 kHz in a wavelength from 1 to 10 km, also known as the kilometer band. Medium frequency is a designation for radio frequency range of 300 kHz to 3 MHz and a part of this band is the medium wave and AM broadcast band. High frequency. It is the designation for the range of radio frequency electromagnetic waves between 3 to 30 MHz, also known as decameter band. Very high frequency. It is the designation from 30 to 300 MHz range with corresponding wavelengths of 10 to 1 meter. Ultra-high frequency is a designation for radio frequency in the range between 300 MHz to 3 GHz, also known as decimeter band, as wavelengths range from 1 meter to 1 decimeter. Microwave and super-high frequency is a form of electromagnetic radiation with wavelengths ranging from 1 meter to 1 millimeter with frequencies between 300 MHz and 300 GHz. Extremely high frequency is a designation for the band of radio frequency in which the electromagnetic spectrum from 30 to 300 GHz. Optical spectrum, also known as the emission spectrum of a light source or some beam, contains information on how the optical energy or power is distributed over different wavelengths. It can be recorded with different types of spectrometers, which greatly differ in terms of the covered range of spectral resolution. Infrared. It is the invisible, radiant energy electromagnetic radiation with longer wavelengths than those of visible lights. It is the extending from the nominal red edge of the visible spectrum at 100 nanometers to 1 millimeters. It is discovered in 1800 by Sir William Herschel. The visible spectrum is the portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that is visible to the human eye. Electromagnetic radiation in this range of wavelength is called visible light or simply light. A typical human eye will respond to wavelengths from about 390 to 700 nanometers. In terms of frequencies, this corresponds to a band in the vicinity of 430 to 770 THz. Ultraviolet light is an electromagnetic radiation with a wavelength from 10 nanometer to 380 nanometer, shorter than that of visible light but longer than X-rays. Ultraviolet light, it is the radiation represented in sunlight and also produced by electric arcs and specialized lights such as mercury vapor lamps, tanning lights, and black lights. Channel bandwidth is a medium through which information is transmitted between transmitter and receiver. It is the frequency range that constitutes the channel. Bandwidth, it is the bit rate of available or consumed information capacity expressed typically in metric multiples of bits per second. There is a more spectrum space available at the higher frequencies. For a given bandwidth signal, more channels can be accommodated at the higher frequencies. Spectrum management is the process of regulating the use of radio frequencies to promote efficient use and gain in a net social benefit. The term radio spectrum is typically refers to the full frequency range from 3 kHz to 300 GHz that may be used for wireless communication. Simplex communication. It is the communication channel that sends information in one channel only or one direction. The International Telecommunication Union definition is the communication channel that operates in one direction at a time, but they may be reversible. This is the term half-duplex in other contexts. A duplex communication system is a point-to-point system composed of two connected parties or devices that can communicate with one another in both directions. Communication is the act of conveying intended meaning to another entity through the use of mutually understood signs and semiotic rules. Computer is a general-purpose device that can be programmed to carry out a set of arithmetic or logical operations automatically. Instrumentation. It is the development or use of measuring instruments for observations, monitoring, or control. An instrument is a device that measures a physical quantity such as flow, temperature, level, distance, angle, and pressures. Instruments may be as simple as direct reading handheld thermometers or as complex as multiple variable process analyzers. An engineer is a practitioner of engineering concerned with applying scientific knowledge, mathematics, and to develop solutions for technical, social, and commercial problems. A technician is a worker in a field of technology who is proficient in the relevant skills and techniques with relatively practical understanding of the theoretical principle. Engineering technician is primarily trained in the skills and techniques related to a specific branch of engineering, with a practical understanding and has a general fundamental engineering concepts. Technical sales representative is qualified and trained manufacturer's representative who provides assistance in the installation, operation, and maintenance of the equipment. Technical writer is a professional writer who produces technical documentation that helps people understand and use a product or service. Trainers, manufacturers. It is the entity that makes a good through process involving raw materials, components, or assemblies, usually on a large scale with different operations divided among different workers, commonly used interchangeably with producer. Service club or service organization. An organization especially of business persons or personals dedicated to the general welfare of these members of the community.
The components and materials are transferred to manufacturers. The product and services of manufacturers are then transferred to resellers, end users, and service organization. The products and services of resellers and service organization are then transferred to end user.